I'm JJWalsh, based here in Hiroshima, Japan. And today I have the pleasure of talking once again with Kathleen Burkinshaw in North Carolina in the US. Thanks so much for joining, Kathleen.
Oh, thank you for having me again. It's so nice to be back and to see you again, Joy.
Fantastic. This time of year, I've been walking around enjoying all the autumn trees, especially the ginkgo trees, and it really made me think of you, Kathleen, because I know that you have gotten one of Hiroshima's survivor trees
Yeah.
there around you. You were able to get one of the seeds and give hope beyond Hiroshima. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? I love it.
Oh, sure. In 2017, about a year after the book came out, I partnered with Green Legacy Hiroshima. And my daughter was at UNC Wilmington at the time, and she was in the Japan Club. And so she worked with her Japanese professor to do a fundraiser so that we could bring one of the trees and the saplings to be able to plant them there. And so we grew a sapling for a little bit, and then we brought it there, and they had this beautiful ceremony to plant it and to dedicate it to not just the Ishikawa family, but to all of the victims in the war. And so it's growing beautifully. It survived a big hurricane a couple of years ago, and it's pretty resilient, just like the hibakusha were. So
Yeah,
it's growing very nicely on
I was
campus.
just walking through Shukeien Gardens in Hiroshima,
Mhm.
and we have one of the beautiful survivor trees there, and it's actually leaning toward the blast, and that is always a point of conversation for visitors if I do virtual tours or in-person tours, and even to remind me, that that regrowing gave Hiroshima people so much hope to see that things could regrow, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's on your blog that you show this picture of how the trees looked right after the
Yes.
bombing in 1945. And, walking around, there's so much despair, of course, because you've lost so many people, but also seeing how nature was completely destroyed. And so
Exactly.
you can imagine, I love that part of the Hiroshima Museum when you walk around. It shows a big picture of a tree and it says, when it started growing again, it gave Hiroshima people so much hope. And so I love that Green Legacy Hiroshima project,
Yes.
taking the saplings and the seeds from Hiroshima trees that survived
Mhm.
and sending it around the world to give hope around the world because we all need hope, right?
Exactly. And so we were able to have North Carolina be the seventh state in the US to have one of those. And in fact, the mother tree is in the Shuken Garden of that. And my daughter, when she studied in Japan for a semester, she took some friends there and then she went into the park and was able to have a picture near it. So it was sort of like a full circle kind of thing. It was really
How
beautiful.
wonderful. Now let's backtrack a little bit, Kathleen, for people who don't know your story and the backstory that actually started you writing this beautiful book, which is aimed at young readers. Um, so you grew up with a Japanese mom. And
Mhm.
what always amazes me about your story, Kathleen, is that you didn't know she was from Hiroshima for a long time, right?
No, she didn't tell. She told everyone she was from Tokyo. And it was really when I was around 11, and my mom had nightmares all the time, but in August, they were very concentrated. And I had remembered that the summer before, it was pretty bad in August too. Oh, there's my mom and I. um, and she finally told me that she was actually born in Hiroshima, but she lost her home and her family to the atomic bombing. And it was too much to even talk anymore about it. So she also said, don't talk about it either. So it was pretty shocking to find that out at 11. And then as I got older, to really understand more what she might have gone through. When I read the book Hiroshima by John Hersey, that was really the first time. And I remember going to my mom and asking her about with the book, and she took the book and she pushed it aside and she said no words could ever describe it. And I really didn't learn much about what happened until I was in my 30s. And it was interesting because I had become very sick. I was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which is a chronic neurological pain disease that affects the sympathetic nervous system as well as your immune system. And the doctors had attributed it to my mother being exposed to radiation during the atomic bombing as to why my immune system had been so badly damaged and then opened up for this disease. And I knew I'd have to give up doing my career that I worked for. And Sarah was 4 at the time. And I really didn't know how I was going to do that. And I became very depressed and despondent. And my mom saw that. And she had come to help take care of me and my daughter once I got home from the hospital. And she started to tell me a little bit what happened on August 6th and afterwards. And she then told me that I'm telling you this because I wanted to kill myself. And I planned to do that after the bombing because I lost everyone. But she said, I'm so glad I didn't, because I had you and now I have a granddaughter to love. And she said that I have the same blood flowing through me, so I can find that same strength to push forward in my own way. So she was sharing something with me to help me feel better. But yet I hope that also by her being able to talk about it in detail where she hadn't before. And really at that point, nothing else was really talked about at that point until my daughter was in 7th grade. And, you know, she really had a hand in how everything ended up happening because they had just finished World War II. And she remembers she was leaving the classroom and she overheard some kids talking about that cool mushroom cloud. And she asked if I would go in and talk about the people who were under that cloud, like her grandmother. And I remember calling to ask my mom, and I fully expected her to say no because she had been so private about it since then. And she said yes. And she said yes because those children would be around the same age that she was. She was 12 when the bomb was dropped. And she felt they could relate to her story better. And also, she knew they'd all be voting someday. And she wanted them to leave that classroom knowing that nuclear weapons should never be used again. And so by going in to speak to the class, it was very interesting because you then find out that the students didn't really know much about it. You know, there's not a lot in history books. There's a couple of paragraphs and the mushroom cloud picture, but they don't know about the people underneath it. And so being able to do that then led to people asking if there would be a book that could go along with it so they could have something on the Pacific side of the war. And being able to do that and talk with my mom and learn more about it really helped bring us much closer. And the things that she shared and the emotion that she let me see in her was something that I'll never forget. And it's just wonderful how my daughter had a play in it. And so there were these 3 generations, which my mom always talked about, you know, the 3 Ishikawa women. And to be able to do that and honor her and continue to honor her by having the book and talking to students and talking to wonderful people like yourself today.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kathleen. I can see and I know it's so hard for you to talk about your mom's story that it hits you every time. I've started doing more tours in Peace Park, and I have to limit myself to doing it only once a month. It's so powerful. And I know you're battling through your own physical pain as well. How do you work through it? I saw on your blog that you have started journaling as one of your ways to kind of work through your emotions as well, right?
Yes, yes. It kind of helps to center me a little bit if I can get them out on the page and maybe not ruminate on them as much. And when I do that, I think I try to take some of that emotion. And in the past, I used it when I was doing writing for The Last Cherry Blossom to kind of put that into it of, you know, I've had moments of despair with the pain and kind of how my mom must have felt at that point. And now, you know, I'm recovering from spinal surgery in February, and there were some complications and I ended up not being able to walk afterwards. And so I've been learning to walk again using a walker, and it's been a painful time trying to work through that. But I started writing again, and it was really my mom's story that helped me one more time, even though she's no longer here. Being able to talk to some of the schools again and doing those virtual visits, being able to try to share a story with the students, and just being able to do that has kind of given me a little bit more hope, to remind me of what my mom said, almost 20 years ago, that I could find that strength to keep pushing. And so she's always with me, helping me now, just as she did 20 years ago. And I really treasure that. And by being able to write in the journal, it really gets me trying to write even further and working on the sequel. And so it gives me some place to kind of escape, maybe for a half hour from the pain, and just kind of get somewhere else and research and learn more about that time period. And it definitely helps now, because I have a lot more pain than I had even a year ago. So
That's really powerful, and I appreciate you joining this show. I know you are battling through some pain right now, so whenever you need to go, just let us know. We're happy to get as many minutes as we
oh,
can. So
that's
whenever
sweet.
you're ready.
Oh, that's sweet.
I just want to point out behind you, you've got that beautiful illumination of the pink cherry blossoms, and you've got the picture of your mom and her dad, right,
Yeah.
who are
Yeah.
central to the book.
They are. They are. It was really their relationship that showed me something. And, even though I didn't know my mom was from Hiroshima for a long time, but she always had a picture, that picture, that was always up in a special place of honor. And I knew how much she loved him, because she told me stories of her childhood and being with her papa, and how he made her feel, and how the way she spoke about it, I could tell that he loved her, just as much. And so it was really looking at that picture. My mom had sent me a copy of it after I had told her that I was thinking of doing a book. And looking at that, it just really gave me the focus of, it's about relationships. It's about her family life and her happy memories as well, and her friendships that she had. And so being able to put that into the book, I think it helps people to really relate to it, because a lot of it is similarity. There are family issues that are going on that other people may have. She didn't like to do homework, and she was messy. I mean, and she didn't get along with the people in her house. And so there was a lot of that piece to it. And so that they could really understand then what she lost after August 6th. And so it was really important to make sure that relationship was given. But I also wanted to do the relationship with a friend, Machiko. And she had someone, she didn't get along with a lot of people, and but she really felt a closeness with Machiko, even though she was a few years older than her. And the friendship that they had, and the things that they'll get into, and when she did lose her that day, how much it affected her, and moving forward, and what her life was then going to be. And so what I love is when the Japanese translation came out, their cover was based on the two girls of Machiko and my mom underneath the cherry trees for the last cherry blossom celebration that she went to. And so that made me very happy to see that. And to also see the girl with the red sweater and the braids is my mom. And so I don't have any pictures of her from that time frame. So it was just so sweet to see something of that drawn for her for this edition that's going to be in her home country, which in her native language, which to me is a wish that I didn't think was going to come true. You just never know. And it was just amazing to know that they also wanted to do something with the book at Hope Chupin. And the translator there, Yoshida Chiyoko, she was wonderful. She took a lot of care and compassion in how she translated it. As well in the art. It's interesting because the person who designed the cover is Ogawa-san. Her first name is Keiko, and she's actually originally from Hiroshima. And so she did the cover design for that and the book jacket. And the wonderful artist was Ishiki Mayumi. Yes, I wrote it down just because I forget as I go along. But she did a beautiful job of that, and it makes my heart so happy every time I see that. And I'm hoping that my mom can see that too, and know that children in Japan can also be reading that story now as well.
Yeah. I think the Japanese version came out after we talked the first time.
Oh
Um,
yes, yes, it just came out August 12th, so it's
yeah.
very new.
Have you had any reactions from teachers or the publishers about reactions to it in Japanese?
Yes, I've had some teachers already contact me to be able to do some virtual visits. And also, I've seen that there have been some reviews that people have done of the book. And it means a lot to me that they liked it because you never know, being Japanese American, my mom was from Japan, but my dad was a white American. And so you don't quite know how it might be received. And you really hope that you researched really well so that you can portray the life accurately. And during that time in the culture, I wanted to show such great respect for that. And to know when you see some readers who have said, how it touched them, and how they look at August 6th very differently now. And sadly, this message is so needed even today. And so I think with it being out there to try to read the story to connect with the humanity. It's nuclear weapons are not just a political issue, they're a humanity issue. And I think, every time they talk about using atomic weapon or there's an article about it, I truly feel they should have a story in there of Habaksha, a short story about what they lost and what they went through, because I think you need to kind of have that together so whoever's voting or the leaders will see it's not just about something that will happen over there. It affects people, innocent people who have nothing to do with any of it. And I just feel that it's so important to have something like that. And so I'm so happy that they feel connected with it as well. It means a lot to me. This edition just touches my heart so much because I know my mom would be so happy that someone would want to read it in Japan as well. So
It's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so wonderful to see it in English as well as Japanese. You've been able to share it so much with the American audience, and talking to school groups. You also were able to share it at the United Nations bookstore in New
yeah,
York, right?
yes, just 3 years ago this month, I was invited to speak at the United Nations and to also speak with some teachers that were there as well. And being able to meet the Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Kathleen Sullivan, who was part of the ICANN program for the Nobel Peace Prize, and to be able to speak with them about my mother's story. And then it was such an honor when they then put the last cherry blossom on the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs resource for education resource for teachers and students. And that just meant so much to me. And it has given me an opportunity to meet so many other students. I've been able to speak with students from around the world. And it's just been amazing to know, my mom said to me when I talked about the book, who's going to really care about this 12-year-old girl in Hiroshima? And with all that, I've spoken to thousands of kids by now since the book came out in 2016 and even before then. And the one thing that they say that really touched them, that makes them want to do something about it, is the story of that 12-year-old little girl. Oh, those are wonderful students that I got to meet with. There's just been to be able to meet with the younger generation and to hear them, how emotional the book made them and how it changes the way that they look at things. My mom, her thing was that, they'll walk out of that room knowing that those weapons shouldn't be used again. And they all fully do. And, it's not when the kids were talking about the mushroom cloud, they just didn't know. There was no connection for them. But by being able to talk with them and for them to read her story, it brings that connection to them, and then they'll understand why no family should ever go through that again. And that's really what I'm bringing with students when I meet with them. And it means a lot to me. They give me a lot more energy and hope to keep going as well. So
That's wonderful. So when you go to the schools and when you do Zoom sessions and talk to
Mhm.
people online about the book, I came across some of your kind of support images that you use to talk about Japanese words. For example, here you explain sakura and kimono and shoji. Um, there's so many wonderful Japanese culture elements as part of your book, right? I'm sure
Yes.
they appreciate that.
Yes, and I really wanted to do that because I felt that if you can show some of the customs, that's kind of like an unspoken dialogue to see what really matters to them. So they learn more about the culture, what the politics were at that time, what they were hearing on their end with propaganda, just so they understand like the everyday life. And it shows some of the differences and how they lived, but it also showed them, like the children, like my mom, they love their families, they love their friends, they didn't know what was going to happen with the war, and they wished for peace, and that's everything that the Allied children were thinking and feeling. And so to be able to bring that recognition in as well. And actually those photos are from someone had put that together for a school project, and had done that. And I was just so happy because I meant, oh, okay, so they were really interested in learning about it. And we did the glossary at the end, because I really wanted to include the Japanese word, but I didn't want to always have to be explaining. So I tried to do that within the dialogue, but at the same time, I wanted them to look it up so that if they really wanted to know more, to make it more real to them, or to bring them closer into the story and the setting as well.
That's awesome. One thing I was reminded of reviewing is how, of course, when you were writing the book and telling your mom's story, people around you were actually worried about whether it was the right thing to do for you. And I found this on your blog talking about how your father was really concerned about, as an American, how to tell the story to Americans, and it being such a political point that he was worried about you having a backlash, right?
Yes, he really was. And, that's why he kept asking me, well, what lens are you using? And I said, well, I'm not using an American or a Japanese when I'm using a little girl and to show what it is. And I made a point of really not making the book political in any way, but to tell this is a time in someone's life, and what happened, and how now that we know what it can do, it's a crime, and technically it really is a war crime if it should ever happen again. And so I was nervous because my dad made me a little nervous, but it was so nice to know that once it was out there, we had soldiers in our family too, and we have great respect for that. And I wasn't siding one or the other. I like to try to do is to tell students that both sides, both stories can coexist. They're very important stories. I had the wonderful privilege of being able to go to Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and they're the ones that had the plant that actually enriched the uranium for the actual bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. And of course, when you're talking with students, a lot of their parents or grandparents probably had worked there. And I said, they were doing their job for their patriotic, and that's what they did. And their stories are important, but we also need to know what happened, and that's important. And I'm hoping that it can kind of bring peace to be that bridge so they can both coexist, and learn about them, but then to understand that it shouldn't be done again. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important, like you say, to understand that it is complicated and there are stories on both sides, and we need to tell them all, and let people get all the information, especially students, to get a variety of information input
mm,
and really try to work it out for themselves,
it's
what
so
happened, right?
yes, yes, because you can't demonize or villainize a whole group of people, of citizens, for something they have nothing to do with. And I think it's just so important that we don't go with, well, they did this, so then that happened, because that's not reality either. And I think it's just so important to, the more that we can connect with the stories, I think that the more people will see, the humanity. And one of the things that I've been working on too is I'm on this advisory council for the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. It's a long name, but basically they do such important work there where they deal with the second and third generations of people. So even though the victims have passed away, it still lives on in the family. And Dr. Yael Danieli is the one who started this, and she started with the Holocaust victims. And they found that the second and third generations were dealing with a lot of psychological, a lot of social issues, a lot of physical issues, and that's not always talked about. And so when it comes to the Hibakusha, you know, a lot of times, most of the time when they do talk about something with nuclear weapons and disarmament, they will respectfully mention of, you know, over the 130,000 people that died. But they don't mention the tens of thousands of people that lived and the families that they had. And also depending upon where they grew up, if they grew up in Japan or like myself, they grew up here. And I have a physical issue from this and some emotional because, you know, I watched my mother dealing with her feelings, which would probably be PTSD now. But you know, I didn't understand. She didn't understand why she would do that. And so it does affect you and it stays with you. And my daughter, you know, has had to deal with, you know, at times she would have seen my mom, but she also saw what happened to me and being sick and knowing that, you know, part of it is where it came from. And so it's very important that we also look to that piece as well when we're talking about things. And I think that's just, I don't think it's always thought about. There's a conspiracy of silence a lot with anything with that, even with the nuclear testing. And so I'm really hoping that by working with that group, there's a group in Hiroshima, you may already know about them. It's the Global Alliance for Sustainable Peace and Prosperity for All. They're out of Hope, Hiroshima, that organization. And I'm on the steering committee there. And it's just been wonderful to work with them because they also want to bring awareness and how important it is. And they're able to travel to some of the places to discuss the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And Article 6 and 7 deals with the victims specifically. And they've been doing a wonderful job. So to try to be on a piece of that, you know, I'm hoping that in addition to when I talk with students, by working with this, you know, my big thing is that I want to leave something to the students, and I know that their empathy will continue to grow from that point. And so when they become adults and they know how they can try to vote for things and work for things, and you know, maybe also today, I mean, just thinking that someone who doesn't look like you or maybe different or you consider them like an enemy, you know, they're not that different from us. You know, we all have a heart, we all feel emotions, and that is, you know, something that is going to link us, you know, that is definitely timeless. And in a changing world, a changing technology world, we still need to, oh my God, your cat is so cute. It's adorable. I'm sorry.
He needs a cuddle sometimes. Yeah, so he's
So
joining
cute.
us now.
My,
But I
my
think
dog is
that
here.
you might have your dog up on your shoulder soon. But having that taking it from the anonymous masses who died because of this bomb or who were injured or survived the bomb, taking it to that individual level. These are mothers, these are sisters, these are people who survived, right?
It's
And
exactly,
I think
exactly.
that's one of the most powerful things about your book, especially aimed at young readers and from the perspective of a child, your mother, as she was 12 years old, right?
Yes, yes, so that they see everything through her eyes, and which is also why I wanted it to be in first person, to be able to tell about it that way, because they're experiencing it at the same time. And I have heard from students that that's exactly what they do. It really brings them in there, and they can almost feel that same emotion. I'm going to get emotional that she would have been going through, you know, at that time, and it touches them in a way that, you know, just reading a history book is not going to do it. And it just shows that we need so many more stories to be introduced into the classroom, so many different countries, so many different pieces that need stories that need to be told. And I'm very grateful to all the teachers and the librarians out there who introduced my book to the students. it means more to me than I think they'll ever know. You don't make money being a historical fiction author. I mean, so it's really about the connection then, that you get, being able to talk about my mom, which is also like visiting with her every time that I do it too. So
Yeah, that's really powerful. I love this quote on the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. I will never forget her voice when she would tell this story, and every single time she would cry, as if it was just happening all over again. Wow, that's
yeah,
so powerful.
and she really would, and she was not someone who would cry in public, but to see her break down and become a 12-year-old again, and at that point she would have been in her 60s, 70s, and to see that, it really affected me a lot. And so that's why when we were talking earlier about the emotion, I can hear her voice, and it just really, it saddens me so much, because now, I think of that 12-year-old and how I would have loved to gone up to her and say, you're going to be okay. Something is going to work out. It doesn't look like it now, but it will. And it just makes me think of all the children now who are in various war zones, and what they're going through. And it angers me when I hear, low yield nuclear weapons, or, there's no such thing as a low yield. And it just angers me to know that we know what can happen, and yet we're still talking about it. We're still threatening it. We still have so many of them that are so powerful. And today, because of people having different countries having them, we're going to feel it as well. It's not going to happen somewhere over there and us knowing, oh, well, nobody else has one, so we're good. It's going to affect us, and the environment. And I just think that I don't want to get off on the tangent. It just really, really, it saddens me and it angers me, whenever I hear that on the news or read about it. Sometimes it just kind of makes you feel a little powerless at the same time,
Yeah. It
if you're,
really, it's that level of hopelessness, right? And
mhm,
you mentioned the environment, and I was reading about, the latest scientists saying that if another nuclear weapon is used, it could collapse all of our food systems.
yes.
It's the weapons that they are holding and using as a threat in case of war now are so much more powerful than we had in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we know the devastation from
Mm,
those was
right.
horrible enough.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Now
Yes.
you had a chance to talk to people. I think it was the Peace Center in Hiroshima as a daughter of a survivor, right?
Yes, I had the opportunity to speak with, along with Naomi Hirahara, who is an author, and as well as Yuki. Oh goodness, her last name escapes me. I'm so sorry. um, but they all being daughters of Hibakusha, and being able to talk about our moms, and what they went through, and then how their stories affected us. And so when the museum invited me to speak, I was so honored that I could do that, and that I'd be able to talk on my mom's behalf, and to share her story. And we were also sharing ours as well, as being the daughters. And it was such a special moment. It really, there are a few things that have happened, like the UN, and then speaking there, that have just touched my heart in such a way that it's kind of hard to explain. I'm so glad I could honor my mom in that way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. There's so many things I want to talk about, but I don't think we touched on the sequel much yet. Can you tell us a little bit about your grandma, or the woman that you knew as your grandma, and then how that's going with your sequel now?
Sure, sure. The sequel that I'm working on, and it's still very much in draft stage, due to my illness and stops and starts, but it's about 5 years, 4 to 5 years after the atomic bombing. And so at this point, my mom is with uh, another family member, but the woman that I grew up knowing as my grandmother is the woman that my mom lived with for the longest time once they moved. And there she is. That's Miyako Okazaki. My daughter's middle name is after her. Uh, and from knowing her, and I've heard stories of my mom when she was living with her and how things went. I don't know as much as I did as far as the August 6th piece, but I know some of the things that my mom went through. And so a lot of it is dealing with, I guess it would be the PTSD now. They didn't call it that then, they didn't know what that was. But she, she didn't understand why she was still alive. She had a lot of survivor guilt. And she didn't know it would be worth to love somebody again after losing her papa and losing her best friend. She thought maybe just being alone would be the best way. And she didn't want to get close to this woman who's sort of like a stepmother to her. And it was just a lot of what she's trying to deal with, because also at that time, we had the occupation forces that were there in Tokyo. And a lot of Tokyo was decimated from the firebombing. In fact, a lot more people died from that than they did with the atomic bombing. So she's learning to live in that environment and to try to make new relationships, maybe make a friendship, but wondering if anybody would really understand what she went through. And when she went there, it was kind of like they were ostracized because, she mentioned she was from Hiroshima. She said she had people that would literally back up from her, thinking that the radiation could just come out because nobody really knew. My mom lived her life there expecting to die at any moment. That she in the first book, they talk about the blue spots that happen to appear because of the cancer from the radiation. And she would literally check her body every day and then mark off a day on her calendar that, okay, this is one more day without any. So she just expected like maybe tomorrow I'll get them. And something will happen to me. So she had all of that. And at the same time, for what I'm learning too, is there was a lot of censorship, obviously, because since the victorious troops were occupying there, they didn't talk about the atomic bombing. They weren't allowed to talk about the atomic bombing. And she didn't want it to be forgotten, but she didn't know how much to do a voice, how to do that voice. And so a lot of that is covered there. There's some fictitious things, but I'm also bringing out some actual historical things that wouldn't have involved my mom, but how it evolved there. And a lot of it is trying to deal with the emotional piece of it, and learning to love again. And a lot of the emotion, especially this past 7 months, I've had my own post-traumatic stress after what happened to me. And so I've been dealing with panic attacks. And so that's another reason why I was journaling, because I feel that I can then put that in there. And these are all feelings that people still feel today. There's trauma for, it doesn't have to be an atomic bomb that traumatizes you. And so I'm hoping that I can bring some issues there, as well as, though, talking about that historical time, which is, again, a lot of people don't know very much about. And I hope that then they can see how my mother starts to, push through some things, and the strength that she finds in the people that come into her life that help her want to move forward. And I won't touch upon in the book, but ultimately all those experiences led her to have the bravery, I think, and the strength to, marry an American and then go live in America, where you didn't speak much of the language right away. And they were the ones that dropped the bomb, and how she wanted to find some way that there could be love, that there could be something like that. And I think those years after the bombing is really what shaped her. She had her struggles, but she was the bravest person, I'll ever know. I won't be as brave as she is in anything, but it gives me hope when I think about, all that she did in spite of everything. So
That's amazing. Yeah. I often get asked by people, why would someone want to visit a dark tourism or such a dark place like Hiroshima, like Peace Park? Why would someone want to read about it, right? But one of the things that I say, and I would love to hear your opinion about this, Kathleen, is I think all of us can understand loss and suffering on some level. And when we read these stories about how people went through the ultimate most horrible experiences and somehow found the strength to move on and rebuild their lives. I think we can all take inspiration from that, right?
Absolutely. And I think, with they, and I think I was almost that way too when I would think of Hiroshima. You still think of, well, the bombing and the fires. But when I actually visited there, we went in 2015 after my mom passed away to honor her on the memorial wall. And, it is a beautiful place. And my mom always talked about how beautiful it was where she grew up. There's the mountains, there's the sea, and I always talk about there are palm trees there. I never thought of it as being, that they have palm trees. That really affected me. But when you go to Peace Park, you know, people say, well, are they angry or are they? No, they're talking about peace. They don't want this to have happened for nothing. People who went through this and suffered, peace should come out of it. And yes, there are things that you will see that are, I guess you could say, dark and awful, but at the same time, they balance that, which Japan is so good at balancing with things. And so then they also have the peace part of it. And it's beautiful there. And I think the stories that you learn, and how you can relate to them, because like you said, everybody grieves, everybody has some kind of a loss. And when you were talking about that, I remember this was when we could still visit in person, right before, maybe about 6 months before COVID. I went to a school out in Raleigh, North Carolina, and there was a young girl there that came up to me for me to sign her book. And she said, I feel so bad of what your mother went through. She said she lost people, and she said, I lost people too. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And she said, I lost many people in my family. She was from one of the Eastern Bloc countries. And so she said, but reading your mother's story and to know that there was hope at the end, she says, gives me hope too. And I won't ever forget her. I will never forget that moment of hearing that, because I know my mom didn't expect any of that. But just to know that it doesn't have to just be war, even it's any kind of loss. And if you can see that, I mean, it can give some hope, then I hope that's exactly what it does.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Yesterday, I was in the Black Building right next to the ABOM Dome, which is where UNITAR is, the
Mhm.
United Nations for the Asia region. And I remember talking with Nasreen
Oh, yes, yes, I know
years
her.
ago, right? And she was one of the co-founders of this wonderful
Yes.
Green Legacy Hiroshima project after she was director at UNITAR. And she told me she would bring warring nation people from Asia who were working on conflict resolution to that office, and they would look out at the A-bomb dome, and just
Mhm.
being there, no one had to point that out. Just
Mhm.
being there and seeing it and walking through the park was such an important part of that seminar or that workshop, just seeing it
Sure.
and witnessing the
Mhm.
power of the nuclear weapons. And if that happened to a building, what happened to
Imagine.
the people? And we need to work out our differences, because we don't
Yes,
want that to happen.
exactly.
So really powerful. And I think telling stories like from your mother and stuff, it has that same effect, right? It personalizes these abstract ideas of war and strategy and brings it
Yes,
down to what
exactly.
actually happens, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So any you said you're working on the sequel, and are you able to do any talks on Zoom? I saw one you were doing with an Australian group, maybe
Yes.
a few years ago.
Yes, that was wonderful. That was like the first time I got a fan letter from another country of that young girl and how she had read the book. And to be able to speak to people, I've spoken to schools in India, and of course in Japan. I've done things with the Hiroshima International School where they've used the last cherry blossom as part of their whole seventh grade program. And they actually, on my website, they made the trailer for the book for me. And also, I'll be speaking at the national school in Tokyo. I might have the words mixed up, but so, and I still speak to the students around here as well. So it's been wonderful to have that. And, with COVID, having to get to know to use that better, but it also opens it up for me because with my condition, I can't always travel places. So it gives me an opportunity that I can, meet with students and to engage in a dialogue with them. And it really, to me, is one of the best things about being an author is being able to do that.
That's wonderful and so important. You're touching so many lives and connecting ideas for so many people that you probably have no idea of. Now, one person that's very directly involved is your daughter. How's she doing? She was one of the reasons that these stories about your mom came to light in the first place, right?
Yes, yes, it was her request that started it all. And, to watch her in college, to take control of the fundraising and to set things up, doing it for my mom, it just was so wonderful to know that she'll also carry out a piece of it. She's going to do it differently, but on the 75th anniversary, she spoke with me when we did that program. She's spoken with the last 2 years for various programs, and to be able to sit next to her and to hear her talk about my mom or about me or the story and how it affects her, it makes me so proud because I know my mom would be so proud that she's going to carry that on as well and find her own way to do it. And being young, I think helps a lot. She's in her 20s, and I think that is a great age to reach out to other young adults to talk about it. And she's done some wonderful things with it and has done some podcasts. And there's much that was from her graduation in high school. And that's my mom next to her.
I love her
Yeah.
purple hair there. I my hair is so naturally white right now, and so I sometimes think maybe I should just go purple. I love that.
Well,
And
my
you were talking
grandmother,
about your Grammy also having purple
she
hair and
did. Yes, you can
hair.
kind of see just a little bit there, but it was very surprising to see that. And my daughter says, well, that must be where I get it. Right now, she's kind of has like a teal blue because she's now working at UNC Wilmington. So, but yes.
Yeah, but that whole idea of how your daughter is taking it all in, how she is adding it to her own experiences and then doing whatever by telling it to other people, podcasting, like you said. This is something we're thinking a lot in Hiroshima as the actual survivors are passing because it's past 77 years now. And the next generation, even beyond our generation, Kathleen,
Yeah, I
our
know.
children,
Yes.
my children growing up in Hiroshima, your daughter knowing the story, right? This next generation, how they interpret, how they put these stories into their activism, or even how they vote, is really
Yes.
important, right?
Very much so. Very much so. And I'm really glad that, she's not afraid to speak up and to tell this story. Even when she was studying in Japan, how she took some students, and did a tour around there, talked about, what my mother went through and where she would have been located. And it's just a wonderful thing, that she can keep carrying it on. Uh, and hopefully we won't need to keep talking about the story so that something doesn't happen again. That would really be nice.
Isn't that's so true, right? Like you often hear that from peace activists like yourself, and I feel that too. Wouldn't it be great if we just didn't have to talk about it? But we do see how if we stop talking about it and people
Yes.
don't think about it, then they start to use the idea of nuclear weapons again because they're
Exactly.
separated from the stories. They don't
Yes.
have any context anymore, right?
Exactly, because a lot of them, wouldn't have maybe their parents who were involved with it before. And so for them, it's just a story, that happened over 70 years ago. And you're so right. I think we need to keep their voices alive, which is what I love at the museum. I know they're training people, even though they didn't have any, relation to someone, so that they can keep telling the Hibakusha story, which is so important. And I think we need to keep doing that because that's what's going to get to people. I mean, I really feel that if you don't have that connection, all this stuff about treaties, which are important, and the statistics and everything else you give out, it's not going to make them want to care or to think about. But once they see, oh my God, that could be my grandmother, that could be me, this could be, and then they're like, okay, so what can we do? You know, and I really feel that that's what needs to be done, and that's why I say, you know, they really should put a little paragraph of it, some hibakusha, what they went through, not mine, doesn't have to be my mother's, but somebody, so that they see that at the same time where they're talking about low yield, like that's no big deal, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's, that's one of the most powerful parts of the museum or the Peace Park is when people see the children's monument and hear the story of Sadako Sasaki,
Yes, yes.
and be able to fold the cranes and wish for peace in their own lives, or at the August 6th ceremony when people write messages on the lanterns
Yes,
and set them on the river. These are important ways for people to personalize it, think about how it works in their own life, and
hmm
then that will perpetuate change, I hope.
exactly, exactly. Me too. That is my hope.
Yeah,
I have a lot of
wonderful.
faith in the students of today and the kids of today. I do.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good to hear. Because there's been so much, what do they call it? Polarization in America
Mm,
now. So it's great to
yes.
hear that you still see hope in future
It is
generations.
in the young people that you see it, you know. And I'm so grateful to see that, especially where there's book bannings and everything that's happening. It's nice to see that the young people are stepping forward, you know, and they're saying they want to know these things. They want to be able to accept everyone, you know, and to make that human connection. And it's a wonderful thing to see. Right now, all the adults were not always so great, but you know, I have a lot of faith in our future with them.
That's great. Yeah. And it's crazy, isn't it? Like we have more information access now in this generation than ever, but still there's too much information and a lot of it, it could be false information. So I really think we're kind of going back to trusting books and authors and researchers more than just our online research now, right? We're kind of reverting back to, because it's too hard to control everything online. It's like
Exactly.
if you can go to a library and it's written by an author and well researched, it's almost like we have to step back to that now.
Go to yeah, instead of Wikipedia or whatever, or blogs or whatnot. And you know, and I think too is that if they can listen to each other's sides or each other's points or points of view, I think that that would help a lot, instead of immediately putting up a defense and going, okay, well, no, I'm not going to listen to anything about it, because you don't know what the other side, what they've gone through, or what is happening. And I think if we can open up those dialogues more, and hopefully these stories, you know, there's so many wonderful, diverse authors that are out there that are writing these beautiful books about countries you kind of heard of, but you really don't know what happened there. And I think it's just so important to have all of those that are available. So yes, I think they need to read those books. They're very important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. And I always mention your book when I do tours
Oh,
around Hiroshima,
that's so
especially Peace
sweet.
Park. No, because people are looking for more material, more stories. Once they hear about Hiroshima, it really helps people process and understand and connect it to their own lives. And so I really
Oh,
appreciate this beautiful book that you've written and all of the education and talks that you do, including joining today. Thank you so much. And
oh, it
just
was
to give a
wonderful.
shout out for how people can find you, this
Oh,
is
yes.
this is your Twitter, KL Burkinshaw one, but also the main one is KathleenBurkinshaw.com, right?
Yes, that is the website, and you can connect with me through there too. There's a contact sheet. There's way for, I have discussion guides for the book, so if teachers want that, they can request that there. And I'm also at Facebook at author Kathleen Burkinshaw, and on Instagram at Kathleen Burkinshaw. So
And you
I love
can
to be able to communicate with various people, and the students will write into the website, and it goes to my regular email. And I do always answer. It may take me a few days, but I always get back. And I just love to hear their feedback, and to talk with them on that. So,
That's wonderful. And you can find the Japanese version of the book on Kinokuniya, which is
yes.
our most popular bookstore in Japan, and then on Amazon, the English version, and other good booksellers in America and other
Yes.
countries.
And so, yes, the Japanese version is there on the. It was so cool to see it in Kinokuniya the first time. I was like, oh my god! You know? So it just felt really good to see all of that. And the English version is doing really well in Japan as well. So
Fantastic.
it's nice to be able to see that. So I hope I can reach and visit more schools. I just wish I could speak Japanese. That's the, but my mother didn't
Oh,
teach
I
me,
think
so it's
you're doing enough. You're doing a lot of great stuff. Just hire a great translator who can help you.
there
Yeah.
you go.
Wendy has commented from Facebook. Thanks so much,
Oh,
Wendy. Great interview. Thank you for this
thank.
important work and
Oh,
sharing you and your family's story. What an important message. Thank you
oh,
so much.
thank you, Wendy. That's so sweet. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining at this early hour. And thank you so much, Kathleen, once again. And please take care.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be back with you. Thank you. Take
Wonderful.
care.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.